Before you hear the ending, you need to understand the moment everything cracked. This isn't a story about temptation. It's a story about restraint, about loving someone so deeply that you choose not to destroy them. And it all began the night my boss's wife said she couldn't take it anymore. I'm David. I was 34 years old when the lie I'd been living finally collapsed, under its own weight. On paper, I was Marcus Sterling's executive assistant, the man who ran his world with precision and silence, who knew every schedule, every weakness, every quiet disaster before it became public. But the truth I never said out loud was that every morning I drove up the long gravel path to that Westchester mansion. My heart wasn't racing because of work. It was racing because of her. Sarah Sterling, my boss's wife, the woman I had no right to want and no ability to stop wanting. For 18 months, I'd lived inside a careful performance of my own, convincing myself that professionalism could smother longing, that loyalty could cancel desire, that silence could keep me safe. It didn't. Sarah was 38, elegant in a way that wasn't loud, with eyes that carried a kind of quiet ache, like she'd learned how to survive by disappearing just enough to be convenient. She smiled the way women do when they've been praised for being agreeable, their entire lives, a practiced expression that protected something brittle underneath. From the outside, her life looked flawless. Inside that mansion, though, everything echoed. Her marriage to Marcus was a museum of success, all glass and stone and distance. Marcus was brilliant, driven, ruthless in business, admired by everyone who mattered. He was also absent in every way that counts. He forgot anniversaries, missed birthdays, delegated affection the way he delegated chores. And somehow, without meaning to, I became the witness to what he couldn't see. Every conversation with Sarah felt like touching fire. The way she remembered my daughter, Lily's name, and asked about her without prompting. The way her hand brushed mine when I handed her coffee, not accidental but not intentional enough to accuse. The way she looked at me sometimes, like she was thirsty and I was water she wasn't allowed to drink. I told myself it was harmless, that I was just kind, that this was friendship. But at night, alone in my apartment, I stopped lying. I was in love with my boss's wife, and it was eating me alive. I watched her shrink over those 18 months, watched the light dull in her eyes while Marcus remained oblivious, convinced that providing security was the same as providing love. He'd saved me once, after my divorce had gutted me, after my wife left with my best friend and my life collapsed into ash. Marcus had given me a job, structure, a reason to stand up again. I owed him everything, which made loving Sarah feel like a betrayal. I was committing every single day just by breathing. November 18th arrived like a reckoning, their 12th wedding anniversary. Marcus flew to Singapore for a board meeting, didn't even pretend to hesitate. That night, I drove to the mansion at 8:47 p.m. to drop off documents he'd forgotten. The rain was coming down hard, the kind that soaks you through no matter how fast you move. When Sarah opened the door, she was barefoot, still in her evening gown, mascara smudged, holding an anniversary card with another woman's name written inside. The house behind her felt cold, cavernous, staged. "I can't take it anymore," she whispered. 5 words, a confession and a warning wrapped together. My chest tightened. My hands started shaking. I knew what those words could mean if I let them. I knew that if I reached for her, if I let myself pull her into my arms, I would cross a line that would ruin 3 lives. Hers, Marcus's, mine. But I also couldn't leave her standing there alone, with that kind of devastation echoing off marble walls. "Get your coat," I heard myself say. "I'm taking you somewhere private." Our eyes locked, and in that moment, the truth we'd been dancing around for 18 months finally stood up between us. She went upstairs and came back in jeans and a sweater, face bare, defenses gone. When she looked at me then, I saw it clearly. She didn't just trust me. She wanted me. And God help me, I wanted her with a force that terrified me. We pulled out at 9:17, my knuckles wide on the steering wheel. Montauk Point, the lighthouse, the place I went with Lily when I needed to. Remember that the world was bigger than my pain. 2.5 hours alone in the dark with the woman I loved, the woman who belonged to the man I owed everything to. Rain streaked across the windshield, miles disappeared, and somewhere around mile 47, a song from the night we met came on the radio. Her hand drifted toward mine on the center console. stopping just short, close enough that I could feel the heat of her skin. That's when I realized this wasn't about saving her from her marriage anymore. It was about whether I could save us both from the fire we'd been quietly building, glance by glance, silence by silence. "David," she said softly as the city lights faded, "I need to tell you something." My heart stuttered. I already knew whatever came next would change everything. She told me about the doctor's appointment 3 weeks earlier, about the miscarriage, about sitting in the back seat while I drove her home the long way and wishing, with a shame that nearly destroyed her, that the child had been mine. The car swerved. I corrected it, vision blurring. She kept going, voice steady now, stripped of pretense. She told me she was tired of performing, tired of being furniture in a perfectly decorated life. That with me she felt real, that she loved me. At mile 63, I finally spoke, asking what she was asking of me. She said she wasn't asking for anything, only telling the truth. At mile 71, I told her mine. About the divorce papers in my hand 6 years earlier. About thinking my life was over. About how it wasn't Marcus who saved me, it was her. The first time I saw her crying alone in the garden, something in me broke open. I admitted that every day for 18 months, I'd lived for moments with her, that I was in love with her and hated myself for it. Silence filled the car. Then she reached across and took my hand. Really took it, fingers lacing with certainty. "Then let's just have tonight," she whispered. I should have pulled away. I didn't. I held on and kept driving toward the lighthouse, toward the place I'd sworn was sacred. Because the truth was, the line had been crossed long before that night. We arrived at Montauk Point at 11:34. The sky had cleared. Stars burned sharp above us. The ocean roared below, violent and steady. We stood on the cliff, wind cutting through us, my jacket around her shoulders. She told me about the painting she'd given up, the studio in Brooklyn, the life she'd traded for a diamond and a promise of security. I held her arm when she stepped too close to the edge, pulled her back, turned her to face me. I told her she existed, that she was real, that she was the most honest thing in my life. She asked what we were doing. I told her I didn't know. Only that integrity had started to feel like an excuse for fear. She said she was scared, that she couldn't go back to disappearing. I told her not to go back. That life was too short. My hands framed her face, wiped away tears. She told me she'd lose everything if she left. I told her yes, all of that, for the chance to live. She cried into my chest, and I held her while the lighthouse beam cut through the darkness above us. When she lifted her face, she touched my jaw, asked if I understood what would change if she kissed me. I said I did. And I was still there. She leaned in. My phone buzzed. 3 short bursts. Lily, my daughter. The message asked if we could go to Montauk this weekend, if I'd make time for her like I always did. The world snapped back into focus. Sarah read the message, understanding settling over her like armor. She told me I was a good man, that if we crossed that final line, we'd both become people we didn't want to be, that this wasn't how we healed, it was how we broke ourselves differently. She said she'd file for divorce for herself, not for me, that I should keep being the father my daughter believed in. She kissed my cheek and let me go. That was the night I learned that real love isn't about taking, it's about protecting, even when it hurts. Part 2. I drove her back, toward the mansion with the kind of silence that feels louder than screaming. The road unwound in front of us, wet and empty, headlights cutting tunnels through the dark. We didn't talk because there was nothing left to explain. Everything that mattered had already been said on that cliff, stripped down to its bones by wind and truth. When we reached the gates at 1:30 in the morning, Sarah slipped my jacket from her shoulders and folded it carefully, like returning something borrowed but precious. I told her to keep it. She shook her head, a small sad smile touching her lips, and said thank you anyway, not just for the jacket, but for seeing her, for almost loving her, for choosing the harder right instead of the easier wrong. I watched her walk up the long path to the door, watched the light turn on inside, waited until I knew she was safe, and then I drove away feeling like I'd left half my heart on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. I cried the entire way back to my apartment, not just for what we'd almost had, but for what we'd protected, for the version of myself I hadn't betrayed, for the woman who finally chose herself even though it cost her everything familiar. The days that followed felt unreal, like moving through a life that no longer fit quite right. I went back to work, back to the mansion, back to the routine that had held us all together. But something had shifted. Sarah avoided me at first, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. When our paths crossed, there was warmth, gratitude, and a quiet ache that never quite left. Marcus remained the same, oblivious, commanding, convinced the world bent toward him because it always had. 3 weeks later, Sarah filed for divorce. I quit the same day. Marcus was furious, confused, wounded in a way I'd never seen before. He demanded explanations I couldn't give without destroying the woman I loved. I told him only that I needed to leave, that it was time. He accused me of disloyalty, of ingratitude. He wasn't wrong to feel betrayed, but he never knew how close that betrayal had come to being so much worse. Leaving that job felt like stepping off a cliff of my own, but there was relief in it too. A strange peace in no longer pretending. The months that followed were quiet, hard, honest. I focused on Lily, on rebuilding a life that belonged to me. I dated occasionally, but nothing stuck. No one felt wrong exactly, just not right. Sarah and I didn't speak. Not because we didn't want to, but because we respected the space we'd created for healing. 18 months passed. One afternoon, in a small bookstore with creaky floors and dust motes floating in the light, I ran into her. She was thinner, lighter, paint under her fingernails, eyes alive in a way I'd never seen before. We talked for 10 minutes like people who'd survived something together, like friends who shared a quiet understanding. She told me she was painting again. I told her I was proud of her. Then we hugged, a simple, honest thing, and went our separate ways. Some love stories don't end with kisses. Some end with choices. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go. What stayed with me after all of it wasn't the night itself, or the almost kiss, or even the ache that lingered long after we'd walked away from each other. What stayed was the understanding that some connections are meant to change you, not keep you. I went back to my apartment that first night after Montauk and sat on the edge of my bed until dawn, replaying every mile of that drive, every word spoken and swallowed. I kept thinking about how close I'd come to becoming someone my daughter wouldn't recognize. How thin the line is between love and selfishness when loneliness gets loud enough. Lily came over that weekend like she always did, full of questions and energy, dragging her backpack across the floor and asking if we could still go to the lighthouse, like we used to. When we stood there together, her small hand wrapped around mine, the wind whipping her hair into her face, I felt something settle inside me. Not happiness exactly, but clarity. The kind that hurts a little going down, but heals you in the long run. Life didn't magically get easier after that. Sarah's divorce was brutal. Marcus fought it the way he fought everything, with money and lawyers and cold efficiency. I heard bits and pieces through mutual contacts, enough to know she paid dearly for her freedom. I paid my own price too. Starting over in your mid-30s isn't romantic. It's lonely and expensive and humbling. There were nights I stared at my ceiling wondering if I'd made the right choice, if I'd thrown away the chance at something extraordinary, because I was too afraid to be judged. But every time doubt crept in, I thought of Lily's text, of the faith in her words, and the doubt loosened its grip. Sarah and I never became what we could have been, and strangely, that's what made what we shared so powerful. We didn't burn it down with regret. We let it remain what it was meant to be, a turning point. When I ran into her at that bookstore 18 months later, it felt like seeing someone who'd survived the same storm from a different shore. She told me about her studio, about Emma adjusting to the changes, about learning to live with less money and more air in her lungs. I told her about Lily, about the new job, about learning how to be alone without feeling empty. There was affection between us, real and deep, but no desperation. We'd already proven what mattered. We hugged, not like lovers, but like two people who knew exactly how much the other had cost them and was worth it anyway. I walked out of that store lighter than I'd been in years. Some love stories don't end with fireworks or vows. Some end with integrity intact and hearts bruised but beating. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do in a world that rewards taking is to choose not to. That's what I learned on a cliff at Montauk Point, standing beside the woman I loved. When love asked not to be claimed, but respected.